Okay, so in the last video, we learned how to categorize variables based on how we measure them. But now we want to categorize variables on how we present them. And here I want to talk about first about discrete and continuous variables. Maybe only with the name, if you remember math, you will know the difference, because discrete variables are variables that don't have decimals, right? Like they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but 1.5 not. That's a continuous variable. But it's not only that I decide to take out the decimal, is that because organically, because of the nature of that variable, you don't have decimals. For example, in here we have number of employees. So number of employees in the store. You can't have 1.5 employees, right? That would be weird. So you have 1 or 2 or 3 employees, okay? You can have maybe, for example, number of shifts, working shifts. So then maybe you have 2 full-time employees and 1 half-time. And in that sense, that will be 2.5 shift of employees working, but not the number of employees, because number of employees will be 3 employees working. But 2 work full-time and 1 work half-time, that can be 2.5, which is actually a continuous variable. So the continuous variable, another example is, for example, the weight, because you can have 70 kilos or 70.5, right? It's not impossible to have 70.5. If you want to round up to 70 or to 71, it is possible, but in nature, it is a continuous variable because you can have decimals. So another important thing about variables. And then let's move to the next, which is also in the same line with dichotomic or dummy variables. And these ones are really useful when you do research or when you want to study something, because first, they are almost the same thing, but in a dichotomous variable or dichotomic variable, it is when you only have 2 possibilities, right? Like you can only have this or this. You can have both, or you can have a third option is only this or this. Like, do you like football, yes or not? And you are very strict and you say, you can say more or less it's yes or not. Or have you ever, maybe a very strict question, like, have you ever jumped from a parachute or do skydiving? Have you ever done skydiving? Yes or not? It's not like you did half skydiving, right? Like, it's yes or not. Another example is if you are dead or alive, right? Like, if we are very critical, we can say that it is a sensible topic, because, for example, like, what happens if you are like in a coma? Technically you are alive, but maybe, or if you have brain dead, are you really dead? Like, all of your organs are still working, but the brain doesn't. Are you really dead or alive? Those can be kind of critical things that we can explore. Like, in ethics is a hot topic, but in general, again, similar with the gender, like we can say traditionally, or do we have 2 genders or we have 2 status? Sorry, is dead or alive. And the other dummy variable is also a dichotomous variable, but we call it as 1 and 0, where 1 is that we have that and 0 the absence of that. So, for example, in the gender thing, we can say that male is 1, that we have male, and 0 is the absence of male. So here it works better with newer definitions of gender, because it's only if you identify as male, you answer 1, and if you don't identify as male, it doesn't have to be female, it can be anything else, then you can say 0. So it works better in that sense. Those are kind of the tricky things that you can do. If you assume there is only 2 genders, female and male, then use 1 and 2. But if you want to show male or not male, or female and not female, then you can say 0 and 1, or binary and non-binary. That can be also another way to do it. So that's why I want to show you this, because in the end, this is useful for your research. The way that you construct your variables and how you measure them are useful. It's not only that I want you to memorize this thing. That would be very, very boring. Like, this is kind of a difficult thing. I wouldn't be teaching you this is not going to be helpful for your thesis and your life in general. Like if you are going to ever do research, it is useful for your professional life. It's the same, this thing. It's not that I want you to memorize what is a dummy. It's that I want you to show you this because this can be useful in your research design. And then finally, these are the most interesting, I would say, variables when you have a hypothetical construct, because these variables, like all the other examples that we have analyzed, age, weight, the altitude, temperature, the gender, these are things that we can observe somehow, that we can measure really objectively. Somehow gender is still on debate, but your things I think are more easy to observe. But what about other things that are complicated, like for example, intelligence? So here is when we are reaching the limitations of quantitative studies, because the quantitative research has made a lot of effort on quantifying things like intelligence, for example, and the intelligence coefficient is kind of a good example. Like we have tried to measure the IQ of people, and then with that we judge if they are smart or not. So a hypothetical construct is expressing a variable is when you have something that can't be objectively or easily abstracted from nature or from reality, is that you have to build that variable, right? Like this is a good example, the intelligence. And this is an excellent and a very important tip, and hear me well in what I'm going to say. For example, quantifying intelligence is difficult. So if your research question has to deal with intelligence, the best thing that you can do for your research, especially in your thesis, is to rely on something that is already developed, like the intelligence coefficient, like the IQ. So don't try to develop something new, like in your thesis especially, like don't try to develop a new technique or a new variable to measure intelligence, because it is a mess. You need to show that that is reliable, that that is valid, that that has been tested, that it's very complicated. It is easier if you use something that has already been tested. And I will tell you something that is happening right now as I am recording the video. There is a group of students who in their thesis want to measure their ecological footprint and the impact of their ecological footprint on their decision of investing on sustainable companies or not. But in their thesis, they decided to build their own instrument to measure the ecological footprint. So that is quite a challenge. So my suggestion and another teacher's suggestion was to pick up one of these already proven and one of these more reliable questionnaires where you can calculate your ecological footprint. So now it's a very easy thing to do. They are going to fix it really easy. But you can start from the very beginning. If you are going to capture a hypothetical construct in a variable, try to look for something that has been already developed. There are other examples. For example, my master thesis was on consumer confidence. Consumer confidence is totally a hypothetical construct. It's not something that I can pick up from there. But luckily, the consumer confidence is measured by the government. So they already have the instrument. So I just had to borrow it from them. And materialism was also my first research paper, where I measure how materialism influenced people on using loans on materialistic things and not really on with investment purposes. So materialism has also an instrument that is already developed and it's reliable and all that. And my idea at that time, I think I was like 21 years old or something like that. I wanted to develop a new materialism tool, but it's such a huge challenge. In the end, I changed my research topic. So I don't focus anymore on materialism, but it's a huge challenge. Like you need like 20 years on research to develop a new tool to measure something in general. So it's better to follow this advice. So these are other ways to categorize variables, and in the next video we're going to talk about how to collect the data. So I hope that you like this discussion about variables, but it's very, very important, and it's quite a challenge that for you to understand this. So take it easy and calm and watch the video again if you need.